Hi, my name is Cassie.
Hi.
In an interview, you mentioned that at age 15, you were the only one in your family who had a job. You said, "Thank God for food stamps, public education, and grants that helped me finish high school and college." How should we as a society recognize the importance and worth of these programs and ensure that they continue to thrive?
I think that we should think of them as public goods. There is a push to think of them as purely entitlements or handouts from government, that they cause people to not be self-reliant, that people become dependent on the programs. But really, in the vast majority of cases, that's not what happens. Those programs, my family was well-to-do. My dad had a great job with a major corporation. When he lost his job, when we descended into a situation where we needed to use food stamps, and most people get off of food stamps as soon as they can and get off of government assistance. So if we view them as public goods, like we do railroads or public schools, then it's something that it's worth putting money aside for. And it doesn't then become a question of, well, if you want that, then we should pay for it, but where are we going to cut somewhere else? No, those are one of the basic things that we should have in a nation that's a developed nation, a leader of the free world, that we should never have young people and families going hungry in this country just because they happen to fall on bad times.
Hi, my name is Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
In our research, we noticed that you grew up in a variety of countries and cultures, as well as earning titles of many firsts in the United States government. Given this, what early challenges did you experience in your journey to success?
I think if you look at it internally, it was more self-doubt. I grew up in a culture in Asia where young women were not expected to become leaders. We're not, there's a certain role. There are gender-specific roles for men and for women. And for example, in my family, even though we're Americans and my folks always were very supportive of everything we did, I was never the one in my family that it was planned that I would join the military. And I come from a military family. It never even entered into my parents' minds that I would be the one to actually make a career out of the military. That was for my brother. So there are some stereotyping in some of those roles. And I think young people, especially young girls, sometimes internalize that and stop themselves from trying things. When I got to flight school, I was one of maybe 2 women for that entire year at the Army Flight School Training Center out of hundreds and hundreds of students that were there. And the flight instructors would come and say, "Hey, do you know any other women who would apply to become helicopter pilots and come to flight school? Because women make better natural pilots on day one. Everything else being equal, the women have a natural instinct for flying that make them better students at the very beginning, but they don't apply." And they found that women were self-selecting themselves and not even bothering to apply. So I think growing up, especially coming from cultures that were more traditional, sometimes I got in my own way. And then, of course, later on in life, my family running into financial problems and really having to work and having to face a lot of issues that were more adult issues that a child shouldn't have to deal with were things that certainly made life more difficult than it needed to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Renata. When speaking about your near-death experience with the Daily Beast, you said, "I shouldn't even be here, so if I'm here, I better do something good. Every day is a payback for me. I measure each one on how effective I am. I don't ever want to be sad about my life." Can you talk about the process of getting to this point where you are able to take such a positive message out of a traumatic experience?
Sure. So for me, I think it goes back to the core of our military men and women, and for me, being a soldier in the Army, specifically, and being an Army leader, an officer. One of the things, your entire career, you hope that you don't let your crew down. You don't hope that you don't let your buddies down, and that you train to go to war, and you never know if you will or not. And then when you go to war, you hope that you can do your job and hold up your end of the bargain, because when you're part of a crew, especially a helicopter crew, it takes all 4 of you working together to survive. And when I woke up in the hospital, I thought that I had actually crashed the aircraft. because the doctors and nurses kept talking about a helicopter crash. And I was sort of in a semi-conscious, they'd kept me in a medical coma, but I was coming out of it, and they didn't realize I was awake and could hear what people were saying. And I kept hearing the term helicopter crash. And a crash versus a forced landing are two very different things to a pilot. I thought that I had to successfully help land the aircraft, which is actually what had happened. And the pilot in command, the real hero, is the person who landed the aircraft. But I kept hearing the term crash. So I thought that I had failed as a pilot, that I had failed as an officer, that I'd hurt my crew, and that I hadn't done a good job after we were hit with a grenade. And I was absolutely devastated. A little while later, I found out that no, in fact, we had actually done our job. And I've been fine ever since. For me, it was about as long as I did my job until the last, which should have been my last moment, I'm okay with everything else. I can deal with anything else because I know that I didn't let my men down. I didn't let my buddies down. So that's how I got to this point. Other folks coming home from conflict go through a different grieving process. We have a lot of issues with post-traumatic stress and military suicides and issues now. But for me, it hinged on, did I do my job? And if I did, then I can handle everything else that comes. And all this because I should have died. I expected to either come home whole and perfectly fine or dead. You don't generally survive aircraft mishaps. So when you're part of an air crew, you sort of have resigned yourself to, I either will be fine or I will be dead. And to have had a mishap and survived it is pretty remarkable, and I'm thankful for that every single day, that I made it out.
My name is Roger.
Hi, Roger.
Bioethicist Leon Cass said, "Necessity is the grounds for taking one's life seriously." Do you believe that experiencing real hardship is necessary to get to a place of true appreciation for life?
I think it helps. I can tell you that I am far more fearless now than I was before. And Congress can be a pretty frustrating place sometimes. And with the partisanship and the bickering and everything that goes on. But I have the unique position of being able to say, no one shot at me today. No one blew me up today, so it ain't that bad. But for me, it is quite literally that. I am much more fearless. I would never have done many of the things that I do now prior to being hurt and surviving. I would never have run for office before. Most of my life had worked very hard and been successful at just about everything that I did. I mean, I wasn't, a naturally gifted straight A student, but I worked hard and I got A's and B's, and everything that I put my mind to and worked hard at, I succeeded. And so failure was something that I would never have wanted to risk. And once I was hurt and survived, I realized nothing is ever going to be as bad as waking up in the hospital like I did. And if that's the worst point, then I can handle everything else. So when I ran for office in 2006 and I lost, I was devastated. I sat in my bathtub and cried for 3 days. But then I got up and went on and went on with my life because it wasn't as bad as what I'd been through. And the adversity and overcoming it and learning that about myself, that I could actually survive something that I would never have imagined I could have survived. Really makes a difference. And I think a lot of us who've gone through personal tragedies or an illness or a tragedy in your own family or with your loved ones sometimes can feel that way. You have to temper steel to make it stronger. And I think I'm stronger now for having been tempered. Hi, Alyssa.
In your hearing of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, you discussed the issue of veteran benefits being altered because of those who manipulated the system for personal greed. Mm-hmm. How is it possible to differentiate between the veterans who truly need benefits and those who are exploiting their rights?
Well, in that one case with that hearing, the gentleman had a high school football injury. So he really wasn't a veteran. He had never swore the oath of office. He had never worn the uniform. So it's a very unique situation. I do think that, there are cheaters in the system who claim injury that's not connected to their military service, and in order to take advantage of the system. And you just have to audit that. But you have to trust what the data says. The data says that over 95% of all claims by veterans are truthful and accurate. So you have to, tie goes to the runner, the benefit of the doubt goes to the veterans, and then you do your due diligence of oversight and do the audits and do the inspections to make sure that people are not cheating the system. Because when you waste that kind of money, it creates an opening for the American people to distrust the system. And then that means that they're less likely to be willing to spend money on veterans issues if they think the money's being wasted. So oversight is really critical.
Hi, my name is Lexi.
Hi, Lexi.
In an interview with the American Prospect in 2012, you said that one of the greatest challenges for women running for public office is that they're told they shouldn't use the word fight, and they're seen as being aggressive when they're not. They're just being firm, and it's viewed as a negative thing. It appears that you have managed to overcome this challenge, becoming a passionate and fierce leader who is well respected within the political spectrum. What advice do you have for women entering politics and navigating gender boundaries that can keep the female politician from being taken seriously?
Well, I think you call it out when it's happening. In my first race, my opponent called me shrill, which is not a term that would ever be used to describe a male candidate. And that was really a way to say, and I was basically being forceful in a debate, and he said, well, she's being shrill. And there's a lot of those words that have connotations and different meanings that get used. And the Women's Campaign Forum has done studies on this and says that when gender bias happens, the female candidate needs to call it out immediately and say, that's gender bias. You would never use that language with a male. And when they do that, the public and the voters understand and side with her. But if she doesn't say something, then they will actually side with the person using the gender bias language. And so it is up to you to stand right up. So I'll give you an example. I was in a debate where I had spoken at the Democratic Convention. As part of it, there was a human interest, some photos from the convention. It showed me on stage where they were trying to decide whether I should wear a blue jacket or a red jacket. And it wasn't my decision. And, they said, bring 2 different colors. We'll see how the set looks. We'll see what Mrs. Obama is wearing that night. And we'll tell you what to wear. So I brought the 2 jackets. And there happened to be a reporter, photographer who just, did human interest stuff. And he happened to take that picture. And in this debate, talking about the needs of the district, my opponent held up that picture of me and says, look, all she cares about is her clothes. And while I was in the district marching, he said, while I was in the district marching in 4th of July parades, she was on stage trying to decide what to wear. And if I had let that go, then studies have shown that the audience would have sided with him and would have accepted that language. But if I called it out, I can flip that back and gain overwhelming support for myself. So that's what I did. And I responded by saying, well, yes, this is true. I was there, and that is me, they were trying to decide what color I should wear. But you have to understand, I have a hard time sometimes because most of my life I've only worn one color. It's called camouflage. And you're being sexist. And that changed it. So Women Campaign Forum has addressed this issue. But it is up on the candidate to call it out. And you have to point it out and say, and use that language. That's gender bias. You would never use those terms against a man.
Thank you very much for
My
your time.
pleasure, my
I know
pleasure.
we're all very excited to get to speak with you today.
Thank you, everyone. This is very exciting. I wish I had something like this when I was in school. All right, well, you guys have fun. Thank you, everyone.